The leaky Ukraine probe, controversy over the use of the word lynching, students arrested for racist speech, libs think God is on their side, and a Syria update jam-packed show coming up.
The president's frustrated. I mean, if you had to go through the 3 years that that the president's had to live through, I think that just is an example of the frustration the president feels. Remember, this all started even before he got elected. This started on July 31st, 2016, when Jim Comey opened the investigation and put the country through 3 years of this false accusation that somehow the president worked with Russia to impact the election. So going through that, and now this ridiculous charade that the Democrats are putting him through, you can understand why the president's frustrated.
Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. Jim Jordan laying it out there. If I were President Trump, man, I would be frustrated too. There has to be some understanding. People have to understand at some level that what we are seeing is hypocrisy in action all the time here. Double standards galore. For one, any investigation that Democrats want to do, any usage of the law, in fact, even changing the law, as we have seen in the state of California, in the state of New York, anything that they can do that harasses, attacks, or undermines Trump, no matter what that means for the process, for rule of law, for fairness, for basic decency, that is somehow acceptable. You will notice that the media has not yet at any point decided that perhaps this is too partisan. Perhaps it's too much. Yes, we had a special counsel, and yes, we've run endless stories about a fairy tale, a fable that the president worked with Russia to steal the election from Hillary Clinton. Was there any introspection after that? Any sense of I'm sorry from the journos who pushed that? No, of course not. They just moved on to now, Ukraine Gate. The Ukraine situation, the same playbook as we saw with Russia. Some coordination with government officials behind the scenes who hate Donald Trump, many of whom work for the federal government. Do not forget that over 90% of donations from federal government employees in the last election cycle went for Hillary Clinton, effectively telling you that, at least for those who are politically involved in the federal government, their politics align with what you would expect from the faculty lounge of Wesleyan University. That's what the federal government is full of right now. There's not a lot of, put the military aside, I'm talking about federal civil servants, bureaucrats. They love the Democratic Party, and they even are okay with some establishment Republican types of the Mitt Romney school, or dare I say, Pierre Delecto. Monsieur Pierre Delecto, creeping around, lurking around the corners of the internet with Mitt Romney behind the scenes. We know that there are many people in the Democratic establishment who will do anything to take down Trump. We know there are people in the Republican establishment who are willing to make common cause with those Democrats to take down Trump. We have to remember that as we see now this continued farce of an impeachment inquiry where they still haven't even identified what the crime is. Now it's going to be an abuse of power? This whole focus, this fixation really on a quid pro quo that we've already established, that doesn't mean necessarily a quid pro quo is not a problem in foreign policy. In fact, it's the way that foreign policy gets done. Oh, but now they're going to tell us that if there's a personal political benefit for the president, even if the quid pro quo would be otherwise acceptable, then it's not acceptable because the Democrat interpretation is the president's not allowed to do things that would benefit his reelection that use foreign policy. That's not a standard that could be applied. That's not a standard that they could keep for future presidents. But it's a Trump-specific standard. Just like, as I mentioned, in California, they tried to change the requirement for candidates to get on the ballot. You must release your tax returns. Oh, yeah, a Trump-specific law. They won't even give the due process protections through the impeachment process, which is a political maneuver. It is not a criminal legal procedure, which is why Democrats are getting away to this point with so much abuse of the whole process. They won't even give Trump the same degree of fairness. Protection isn't even really the right word, of fairness, that they had back in the Nixon or Clinton impeachments. because there are Trump-specific rules. They will destroy all the old rules in order to make up new ones so that they can get after this president. And that then brings me to the testimony yesterday of William Taylor, the top diplomat in Ukraine. This was yet another day when I saw, as soon as the leaks about his testimony came out, and there was even a leak of his opening statement. Oh, you mean that this person who's only allowed to testify behind closed doors and was able to go on, I think, for 10 hours, I saw yesterday, it was just marathon testimony behind closed doors. His opening statement, crafted to create the perception of maximum gravitas for him and maximum damage to President Trump. I read the whole opening statement, but that got released, that got leaked out to the press. We knew that would happen. But what about the question and answer? What about the only opportunity that Republicans could have to point out that there are some real problems in the opening statement? I mean, for example, this guy Taylor was in many ways out of the loop on key Ukraine policy discussions. He was angry, a little bit bitter, and bureaucrats, especially diplomats, get very territorial over what they consider to be their portfolio, their area of bureaucratic operations, and was angry at Trump on policy level. So we know he doesn't like Trump. He feels like he wasn't given his due in this job. And people will say, wow, he's been a diplomat. He's been a United States ambassador for so many years, so many decades. The State Department is full of people who have far too high a sense of self-regard and really believe that presidents come and go, but the State Department is forever. Full of people like that. Doesn't mean everybody there, but that's a very common sentiment you'll find among those at Foggy Bottom. There's a particular arrogance at the State Department that really exceeds anything I've seen or come in, and this is from personal experience with the State Department and its folks. Arrogance that exceeds anything I've seen elsewhere in the federal bureaucracy. The State Department really thinks it's awesome and fancy, and its people there really are doing important stuff. Most of them are completely extraneous and unnecessary. A majority of them, I would say. You could get rid of more than half the State Department. It wouldn't matter one bit. Don't even get me started on how much of the intelligence community you could get rid of, but that's a conversation for another day. So we had William Taylor doing this testimony, and because he believed that there was an illicit attempt to force the opening of an investigation in Ukraine by withholding the aid, that was then translated by the journalists who got the exact leaks that Adam Schiff wanted them to. That was then translated into, oh my gosh, Trump must be finished now. Oh, impeachment, impeachment. We see all these new polls. Majority of the American people support impeachment and removal, they tell us. There's some Republicans who will be turncoats against Trump because of this. Even Lindsey Graham said that if something came out that was damning enough, he would consider voting to remove the president as a United States senator. But then when you look more closely at this, you find that, wait a second, William Taylor is just sharing his opinion. An opinion that, for example, Ambassador Sondland disagrees with, and there is textual evidence that shows that Sondland says, look, there's no quid pro quo here, and Trump wants to be very clear about that. Now, there's a back and forth over what the quid pro quo would be for, but when you look at what really happened here, there's another problem that Democrats can't seem to get around, won't be able to get around. The aid wasn't withheld, nor was there an investigation open because of the withholding of aid, because the Ukrainians didn't even know that aid was being considered to be withheld, or there was a consideration of withholding it. So where's the crime? Even where's the political crime? Ukraine got its money. Oh, and by the way, President Trump is the one who approved giving Javelin anti-tank missiles to the Ukrainian resistance, as well as long-range sniper rifles, which the Obama administration explicitly refused to do. As Obama's NSC director for Ukraine told me personally when we were debating this issue not long ago, because Obama didn't want to seem too aggressive against Putin. Oh, but Trump is Putin's puppet. Trump is the commander-in-chief who comes in and says, let's give lethal aid that the Europeans won't do, that Obama wouldn't do. Let's give that lethal aid to the Ukrainians to fight back against this Russian invasion of the Donbas region in the east. Oh, but he's Putin's puppet. He's doing Russia's bidding. Trump is the commander-in-chief while on his watch, 200 Russian paramilitaries are blown up in the Syrian desert for going after our Kurdish allies. But I suppose that was also on Putin's orders. This is fantasy stuff. This is ridiculous. But if you have been propagandized to enough with all these anti-Trump hysterics around the Russia collusion issue, you'll believe anything that the press says at this point. With each passing day now, we have another revelation. Laura Cooper, for example, is a senior Defense Department official who dealt with Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. She is being deposed today by lawmakers. Who wants to bet that there'll be a couple of bombshell revelations from Laura Cooper? Bombshell. Oh, Trump cannot recover from this. Trump is finished, I tell you. But he won't be. The histrionics and the hysteria from Democrats around Ukraine Gate is all manufactured. It's obvious to anyone who has been paying attention to what really is happening here. Democrats can't handle the prospect of 4 more years of Trump, and they must know that if there's going to be an election with the field that they have put forward against this president, and when enough Americans can hear from this president about what's really been done for them, what the government has been up to the last few years, it's not looking good for Team Left Wing. That much is for sure. Yeah, there'll be leaks today. We'll hear more about this. We'll hear more opinions from career bureaucrats who I guarantee you, if you could look it up, you'd find out they voted for Hillary Clinton over Trump. Every single one of them. You will not have a single Trump supporter from the State Department who comes forward and says, yeah, I think that Trump violated his oath of office and the Constitution in order to change Ukraine policy. And we're told that that's a coincidence, that's just happenstance. This is partisan warfare playing out through a shoddy process stacked against the president, lacking in transparency, lacking in honesty, run by Adam Schiff, no less, for the power-mad establishment political class. That's what we're dealing with.
Obviously, what he said in the press conference was of real concern because he said, in effect, that they were holding up funding going to Ukraine, in part based upon a desire to have Ukraine carry out an investigation with regards to the 2016 election.
Why is that a problem? Someone tell me this. Why is that an issue? That's a completely legitimate line of inquiry for our government. And yet we never hear about this. We never hear the other component here. I mean, first of all, what team is Mitt Romney playing for? Well, we know it's Team Pierre Delecto. He's playing for Team Mitt Romney, and I got to say, I think that I'm a relatively savvy customer, a savvy cat, when it comes to these different politicians, because I think they're all pretty much shady, and you can't really trust them, and they're very full of themselves. But I didn't realize what a narcissist Mitt Romney was. He hid it really well with all that gee golly, aw shucks stuff back in the day. And now when his party and the ideology that he supposedly stands for of conservatism could really use a little bit of help, he is just kicking them in the back as they walk away all the time. But the way that they've attacked this Mick Mulvaney press conference, where he's trying to have a nuanced discussion about a very complicated issue, which is what really does make foreign policy tick? What makes it work? How do you do this? How do you negotiate? How do you interact with foreign counterparts to get them to do what you want them to do? And where do we draw the lines about what is acceptable and unacceptable in terms of how it may benefit those different actions that you take, how it may benefit a particular president of a particular party? We haven't seen much of an explanation of that, have we? An investigation of 2016 election interference that touches upon anything involving Ukraine is completely and utterly legitimate, and using leverage that the United States government uses all the time for different reasons in foreign policy, using leverage to that end is not a crime. It's not even a problem. You know, we had our friend Andy McCarthy on last week, and he talked about this. Yeah, the way that Trump has gone about this is unorthodox and perhaps problematic. But let's also remember, that's one, not enough for an impeachment and removal from office. That's just crazy. And two, Trump cannot trust the people within the process that have been handed over to him in the federal government in many cases, as we have seen. All these leaks. Look at this deep state effort from within the intelligence community once again after the Russia collusion lie, and that failed. Now you have another effort from within the intelligence community to try to take him down based on this Ukraine phone call. Someone who secondhand heard something about something involving a conversation between the president and his Ukrainian counterpart, Zelensky. Of course the president doesn't trust these people. Of course he has concerns about whether or not they're going to go against his foreign policy, go against his decision-making. Remember, he was sent there to break much of the status quo. He was sent there to say, I'm not going to do it the way we're all supposed to do it anymore. And in foreign policy in particular, there's really no more ossified, no more structurally locked in ice or in stone. I guess ice melts, so stone will be better. Part of U.S. government policy than foreign policy. You look at what's gone on the last 20 years, it's been, yeah, there's some differences here and there. Obama liked to go and bow. He liked the bad countries that aren't our friends and tried to explain to, the Cubans why it's our fault that Cuba is a prison island stuck with cars from the 1950s and, why Venezuela now doesn't even have potable drinking water for people. It's probably America's fault. The Obama administration took a very different approach in that regard. But in terms of wars and interventions, and you've had a very bipartisan foreign policy now. It's just a question of which country we invade or which country we take military action in. But trying to reduce that, I see now. And we'll get more into the latest out of Syria. But Democrats who I can recall seeing on TV claiming that America is becoming an empire and America's far too involved in its military commitments in active war zones. That's different from just setting up a base somewhere. In active war zones around the world. Now, all of a sudden, when Trump is trying to do what they have said they wanted him to do for a very long time, he's basically Hitler. And if you're Beto, you say, okay, well, if he's not Hitler, then explain to me, why he's as bad as Hitler. Yeah, riddle me that, Beto says. That's where we are.
The gall of Donald Trump to refer to a process that is holding him accountable to our democracy and justice. The gall to suggest that he is experiencing a lynching and he's doing it just to whitewash the fact that he has actually committed crimes and should be held accountable by the United States Congress and by the people of our country. Yet again, it is an example of Donald Trump having no appreciation for the history of this nation, for which he is now the commander-in-chief.
Oh my gosh, Donald Trump. So awful that he would use the term lynching. It's let's have a whole news cycle just on this. Let's spend an entire day. Now, I said to you yesterday, he's got to know that this is going to inflame the Democrats, the left. They're all going to freak out. And the rest of his message, which is that he's being treated unfairly in this, which he clearly is. I mean, no serious person can argue otherwise. This impeachment inquiry in secret, it's like an inquisition. There's no right to challenge these witnesses. It's all just being run as a political charade, as a scam by the Democrats. But because he used the term lynching, they were going to just focus on that, and everything else would become secondary in the conversation, at least for the day. In fact, even Senator Mitch McConnell, who, look, he's been good on judges. Mitch McConnell, I call it as I see it. Sometimes he does good things. Sometimes he's a bit wimpy. Here's what he had to say about Trump's moment of verbal, what would we say, verbal infelicity, verbal problem, whatever. Play 19 here.
Given the history in our country, I would not compare this to a lynching. That was an unfortunate choice of words. It is an unfair process, And a better way to characterize it would be to call it an unfair process.
I saw the outrage meter was at 11 yesterday because President Trump referred to the process against him as a lynching. Now, there are a couple of things that jump to mind initially about this. One is we have Democrats who, and without apology and without any hesitation, will say that the president is a fascist, that he's a white supremacist, that he's a racist, that his supporters are white supremacists, that he supports Nazis, that Border Patrol under this president are acting like concentration camp prison guards. Where do I need to stop here? How much more of that do we have to hear before the calls from the left for greater caution in speech? We need to be more civil to each other. It all seems quite disingenuous, doesn't it? They don't really mean any of this. They just say it because they're in a fight. There is this lust for power that drives so much of the political discussion right now. People pretend that it's about principles. It's not about principles. But there's a bigger problem here, even for the Democrats, because we've been told, how dare, oh, wait, I'm sorry. Here's a perfect example. Miss Ocasio-Cortez, she's like totally has thoughts on this, and she like wants to share them. Play 22, please.
It's horrifying that he would do this, but also we have to understand that he is using our pain to his advantage as well. He chose that word deliberate. You know, like people think that he uses these words as mistakes. They're not. He deliberately chooses the most racially animating, divisive terms so that he can rile up that base, because that's what he knows he can build power on. And the real question is if this is how he builds his power, what does that mean for the future of our country and for our safety? He relies on the outrage, which, like, we have to say something, right? We cannot allow this to be normalized. So he relies on that outrage, and then he uses that outrage, takes it to the base and says, see, they don't like us, and if you don't like this, they're being too sensitive, we're going to rally their support. And that's exactly how he operates in dividing this country.
Oh, terrible, right? Awful. What Trump using this word, it's a dog whistle, it's racially divisive. It just shows you all the terribleness of Trump and how we should all just sit around and have a big pity party about how he's ruining the country and ruining the Constitution. Everything he does is awful. Everything he does is destroying our very core, our essence as human beings and as a country. And his use of this word should be repudiated across the land, and he should apologize for this, and it's terrible. And oh, wait a second. Who else uses this word in politics? And about what? Oh, it turns out that Democrats, when Bill Clinton was being impeached, frequently, repeatedly, over and over again, used the term lynching. Oh my gosh, what a shock. Play 21.
My votes are a protest against an unfair process. The inequities in the impeachment process have been glaring. What we are doing, or what we're doing here, is not a prosecution, it's a persecution. And indeed, it is a political lynching.
So I will not vote for this nightmare before Christmas. I will not vote for this lynching in the people's house. I will vote against these resolutions.
Even if the president should be impeached, history is going to question whether or not this was just a partisan lynching.
This day feels to me like we're taking a step down the road to becoming a political lynch mob.
And for those of you who say that this isn't about sex, I agree with you. This is about getting rid of the President of the United States. The whole idea is a lynch mob mentality that says this man has to go.
Wait a second, was that Joe Biden who during the Clinton impeachment process referred to a partisan lynching? Doesn't Joe Biden know the history of that word? Doesn't Joe Biden know the racial divisiveness, along with all the other Democrats who were speaking there? All of them back in 1998, 1999 during the, or 98, I guess, during the Clinton impeachment. All of them. Well, was that horrible? Should Joe Biden be forced to apologize? Oh, no, of course not. Because remember how we started off the show talking about double standards and that's a feature, not a bug, of the Democrat apparatus now, that they have to operate on double standards all the time because it's really just about power. See, a standard has to remain consistent over time, and you have to adhere to it even when it is inconvenient for you, for it to really be a standard, for it to be a principle. But Democrats don't really have principles. They just have feelings and rough guidelines and the usage of mob mentality to leverage guidelines that are constantly shifting and changing, to leverage rules that they make up as they go along in order to shut down and shout down their political opponents. Okay, well, that's not principled at all, is it? That's actually quite opportunistic, which is really the opposite of being principled on these matters. Joe Biden's not going to apologize for that, though, because you see, when he says that word, he's one of the good guys. This is what Democrats will tell you. Joe Biden's not going to be criticized for this because he's on team, we're going to make this not a problem for you. He's not on team Republican, which means that you're going to get crushed. You're going to get ruined. So I give credit to those Republicans yesterday who were saying, no, sorry, we're not going to bend the knee over Trump's use of the term lynching. Because as soon as they started going through the archives and looking, Democrats say this all the time. Everybody knows what Trump is getting at. It has nothing to do, his usage of the term has nothing to do with race. And as I said yesterday, and people get all uncomfortable with this, but there were lynch mobs that attacked people it was not racist because they were lynch mobs against white individuals who were believed to have committed some crime. So a lynch mob is not inherently it was often and horrifically, but not inherently a racist body. But all that got lost yesterday, right? Because what was most important yesterday? What was the single driving factor of the news cycle? What got people really angry at Trump? Lynch mob. The lynching. That was the problem. And it's somewhat ironic, you could say, that on a day when people are rushing to judgment and attacking a person under false pretenses, and they're doing it over the usage of a term for a rush to judgment and a horrific extrajudicial attack on individuals. And they just don't seem to understand that we have Google and we have the ability to go back in the archives and look at things and figure out what was said about whom and when. And if this were 20 years ago, do you think that CBS or NBC News or anything would have gone to the archives to find that Joe Biden clip from 1998? Of course not. We never would have known. But now we know. They're hacks, folks. They're frauds. The Democrats who jump all over Trump for using the word, the media that pretended it was the worst thing to have happened in, at least 24 hours with Trump. And we all had to waste our time hearing about this, all the denunciations and everything else, when they didn't mean any of it. It was just about bashing Trump. Because really, for them, everything's about bashing Trump.
People are upset about President Trump's words all of the time. But what you can't argue with are the results he's put forth for the African-American community, whether we're talking about opportunity zones in inner cities, whether we're talking about criminal justice reform, which is something Barack Obama wanted forever, that Democrats clamored for, but only Donald Trump was able to deliver, and the fact that his economic policies have resulted in record low unemployment in African-American communities as well.
That's what the Democrats don't want to have happen. People starting to judge, from any community really, the results of this presidency as they affect Americans in their everyday lives. Has President Trump made it harder or easier for you to pay your bills, keep your job, advance in your career, start a business? Has he made it more or less difficult for people to be able to support themselves, to have greater financial autonomy and all of the benefits that come with that? They're going to skip past all of that and immediately or continuously make this all a question of whether or not a good person could vote for this president. It's supposed to become a referendum on who we all are as human beings. Meanwhile, I see a presidency with a record that any Democrat would be heralded for in terms of the economy. And yet they've stopped saying it's the Obama economy because that was the talking point for the first year or two to make it seem like, oh, whatever, it's the Obama economy. What, really? Is it still the Obama economy? Because we're in year 3 now, going into year 4 pretty soon. Is it still the Obama economy that we're gonna? That was the line that I would hear this when I was down in D.C. working at the Hill. I would hear about how, oh, it was all because of Obama. Turns out that's not the case. Another area where I have to say I've really started to lose patience is with people just claiming that Trump is violating the Constitution. They say this because they think it sounds smart and serious. He is violating the Constitution. But I always want to turn around and ask, how? How is he violating the Constitution? In what way? In what manner is he violating the Constitution? I mean, here's a perfect example. You have Senator. By the way, my gurgling Gurgin from CNN and Patrick Leahy, it's the same voice because you can't. I would challenge you if you put a screen up between them, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart. Senator Patrick Leahy in Vermont. It sounds like this. Judiciary Committee. And for those of you who are like, Buck, what are you saying? Exactly. But Leahy claims that there are violations. Producer Mark, if you would, please, let's hear from Senator Leahy, clip 9.
He should read the Constitution. He didn't know that emoluments clause is part of the Constitution. He thought it was some kind of a regulation. I wish you'd take the time to do what every other president has done. Sit down, read the Constitution.
Emoluments clause. Let's just sit down and read the Constitution. That's pretty much the extent of liberal analysis of the emoluments clause and how Trump is violating the Constitution. I appreciate that Trump, he's just not having it with this stuff. He's not playing their game. You know, it's legs said there's just read the Constitution. Here's Trump responding to this emoluments clause nonsense. Play clip 3, please.
Other presidents, if you look, other presidents were wealthy, not huge wealth. George Washington was actually considered a very, very rich man at the time. But they ran their businesses. George Washington, they say, had 2 desks. He had a presidential desk and a business desk. I don't think you people with this phony emoluments clause.
Remember, they've been claiming that because Trump owns, for example, the Trump Hotel in D.C., that's corrupting foreign influences because foreigners go in to the Trump Hotel and get a martini and some French fries. And that money trickles all the way to Trump in a way that it could corrupt him or direct his foreign policy. They look at this stuff all the time. Who's throwing parties at the Trump? I used to hang out at the Trump Hotel in D.C., so I know all about this. Who's throwing parties at the Trump Hotel? How much money is this group or that group spending at the Trump Hotel? It's a hotel. People are going to exchange goods and services there. They're going to pay for things. Anybody who walked into Trump Hotel or Doral or any of these places and said, I'm not going to stay here tonight unless you decide to break off all relations with the country of blah-blah-blah, would find that that doesn't work very well. And that's what the emoluments clause is about. Actual corruption of policy by individuals who are foreign.